Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Like I said, my name's Mike Viola. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications here at Allied. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar regarding the new ANSI standards regarding access equipment and mobile elevating work platforms. This is information that affects a large portion of Allied's clients and the industries that we specialize in. So our risk engineering team members here have thoroughly educated themselves on the new standards and their impact within our industries. One of those gentlemen is here presenting today. His name's Cameron Boots, and he's Allied's Director of Risk Engineering. Before we get underway, there's just a quick couple housekeeping items I'd like to mention. First, everybody besides the presenter, Cameron and myself, is muted. So if you do have a question, please type it in the question box within the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also collapse this control panel if need be. We will address any questions at the end of the presentation. And second, we will be recording this webinar, and it will be made publicly available for free to anybody who would like to share it or view it again. We will place it within our website's blog page, and we also put it on YouTube, and we'll probably also send out an email blast letting everybody know that it's accessible, and there'll be links within the email as well. Other than that, that's it. And without any further delay, let me pass it off to Cameron.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us on our webinar on the new Access Equipment ANSI standards. We're going to keep this webinar to about 15 to 20 minutes, and we are going to give an on-ground perspective of these new ANSI standards. For those of you that have read the new ANSI standards, they can get very informational, and there's a lot of information on it and a lot to cover. So the points that we are going to cover today are going to be the information that will affect you, your business, and how you would technically be operating the new access equipment in regards to the ANSI standard. So again, like Mike said, my name is Cameron Boots, and I am the Director of Risk Engineering for Allied Insurance Brokers, where we specialize in the scaffold and access as well as the crane and rental industries. And our main goal here is to provide this information to you and basically the answers to the questions you have not asked yet. So if there's anything that you would like to see moving forward in regards to webinars, please let us know, and we would be happy to conduct those types of webinars. So first thing we're going to cover the four main core changes as to what the new ANSI standard is going to cover. So the first one is the naming change. So in regards to this ANSI standard, the equipment used to be and is still currently called AWP, or aerial work platforms. That name is getting thrown out and replaced with this new acronym, mobile elevated work platforms, or as some people say, MEWP. Today we'll just refer to it as MEWP. The reason for this change is the standard has been broadened to cover a lot more access, mobile access and mobile elevated equipment that we're going to dive into a little bit more. So it covers your aerial reach equipment like your JLG or your Genie, a scissor lift, a spider lift. Any mobile elevated equipment will now be covered underneath this standard. And for those of you that don't know, ANSI stands for the American National Standards Institute. So the second major change is with load sensing. So if anyone is familiar with crane standards, this will be nothing new to them with what's coming with this new mobile elevated work platform standard, but it's very comparable to cranes. So how will load sensing change? Most machines will actively monitor the load. So for example, if your machine gets overloaded, there's going to be a sensor, and there's going to be a shutoff to not let it become overloaded, because as accidents in data has shown in the past, this has been a cause of a lot of incidents and a lot of even some fatalities in the access equipment area. The machine will not operate with normal functionality if overloaded beyond the rated capacity. There's going to be some new mobile elevated work platform equipment that will have different load capacities depending on how many people are in that specific equipment, and that will be posted when the standard is released. Rental companies and contractors alike should be aware that jobs which had previously been inappropriately completed by overloading machine will require different planning and execution with new units that will be designed to inhibit this misuse. The next change is going to be the stability testing requirements. Now, if you look to the right here, you see a tire, and how the tires will change with the mobile elevated work platforms is they are going to be foam filled. The reasoning behind this are the tires of this equipment, the majority of this equipment, are the support, and similarly, like the outriggers to a crane, the outriggers to this equipment. So if you can think, let's say you're 80 feet up in the air on a mobile elevated work platform, and let's say you have a tire leak, let's say it's leaking air, that's going to affect your stability, that's going to affect how the load is transferred, and can ultimately cause an incident. So the tires are going to be filled with foam to prevent that type of incident. So flotation tires within the new equipment that will be manufactured under this new ANSI standard will not have flotation tires. The next thing that's going to change are entrance gates. So a lot of you may know, like for example, the scissor lift you see here to the right, the chain entrance will be replaced on electrical and vertical masts. Due to the simplicity and cost effectiveness, the most prevalent scissor lift entrance in the North American market today is the chain entrance. With the move with the new standard, flexible devices are no longer permitted to be used as platform gates, and toe boards have to be present on all areas of the work platform, including the entrance. This mandates a shift away from chain gates to half height, full height, or saloon style gates for all scissor lifts. So in summary, chains are not going to be able to be used and will not be used on the newly manufactured equipment as a form of fall prevention and guardrail. All right, the next change is going to have to do with the railing height of the mobile elevated work platform. And again, what we have pictured here is a scissor lift. So currently the solid railings are at 39.5 inches or 1 meter. The new railing heights the new standard has the new railing heights changing to 43.5 inches or 1.1 meters. Now, this could cause an issue because now when this scissor lift is fully collapsed, and let's say you are going through a doorway, it is not necessarily going to fit. So this additional height results in these smaller units no longer being able to fit through standard door heights with the rails deployed, necessitating a change to folding rails as a standard on a number of units. So one of the things that you're going to see with the newly manufactured scissor lifts under this new standard are collapsible rails and folding rails to be able to fit through that door and to still be able to comply with the standard. So what we just went over is how the equipment is going to change when the new standard is passed, and that's how any new aerial reach or aerial reach piece of equipment that you purchase or rent will be complying with that. But that is once the standard changes. Now, how can you prepare as a company to become compliant when utilizing mobile elevated work platforms? The first one, it really has to do with training. They are releasing new requirements in regard to training with mobile elevated work platform. And the first one is the safe use planning, competent person training. What that's going to cover First thing it's going to cover is the risk assessment to identify the hazards in using that piece of equipment. Let's say you're inside. What are the hazards above? Let's say you're outside. What's the weather going to be? How is that wind potentially going to affect your mobile elevated work platform? The next piece of info that it's going to cover is the selection of suitable mobile elevated work platforms. A mobile elevated work platform with a 120-foot boom necessarily isn't the adequate piece of equipment to use inside of a garage. It's a little too big for that job, so make sure you're picking the right equipment associated with that job. The third, access preparation and maintenance of the site. This all has to do with where is that mobile elevated work platform going to be sitting? Is that going to be stable ground? Is it gravel? Is it sand? Will that shift as loads are added to that piece of equipment? Maintenance, including inspections. So training on how to maintain that piece of equipment, as well as the daily, monthly, and annual inspections for that piece of equipment. So only trained and authorized personnel are allowed to operate and or occupy the mobile elevated work platform. Now, the big word in this statement is occupy. This is not just the training for the operator. It is also required training for anyone that will be inside a mobile elevated work platform. Continuing the familiarization of authorized mobile elevated work platform operators. This goes back to, is that operator trained? Is he competent? Is he certified underneath what the company requires for him to operate that mobile elevated work platform? Responsive to hazards and incidents. So let's say there is an incident with that mobile elevated work platform. Let's say someone is hanging outside of the basket at 50 feet and he falls out and he is now hanging there from his personal fall arrest system. How do you respond to that? How do you get up to that worker? How do you bring him down? Let's say he was the operator and he was the only one in that cab. Being able to take the right steps, for example, knowing that the controls for the basket are also at the base of the piece of equipment in case this happens, is vital to know. It could be the difference between a minor incident and a fatality. Trained and qualified supervisors to monitor the performance of the work. So I always go back to another set of eyes is always a better set of eyes within a job, because they can point something out that somebody might not have been able to point out before. Prevention of unauthorized use of the mobile elevated work platforms. Let's say someone's getting on there that has never used a piece of this equipment. Let's say they're inexperienced. You want to make sure you identify that before they put themselves into an unsafe work environment. Safety of persons not involved in the operation of the mobile elevated work platforms. This equipment is going into job sites that might be condensed. There might be 50 other workers on that job site. You want to make sure they're aware of what's around them, what's above them, to make sure that their safety can be solidified. The next training that will be required with this new standard is supervisor training. Now, this one was intriguing to me when I first learned about it, and I'm actually glad that they're taking these necessary steps, because it really spreads the accountability, and like I said before, it adds another set of eyes to this work process. What this training is going to consist of is the proper selection of the correct mobile elevated work platforms, the rules, regulations, and standards. So the supervisor is going to be basically in charge of, is this correct to the standard? The last thing you'd want to do is not follow the standards, not follow the regulations, and let's say have an OSHA representative walk on site and nail you for it. A supervisor is going to be able to add that value to make sure that doesn't happen. The next thing, potential hazards associated with the use of the mobile elevated work platforms. So if you're going 120 feet up in the air, and let's say he has a bucket of tools on there, and let's say there's people below, I mean, you could drop the tools, and that's definitely a hazard that's associated with the use of this equipment. The next, the knowledge that the manufacturer's operating manuals provide. This is huge because every piece of equipment is different. Every mobile elevated work platform, as I said, there's a broad amount, but even manufacturers, whether it's a JLG or a Genie, could have different controls. Let's say their emergency shutoff switch is at a different location compared to the JLG you operated yesterday. The third training that will be required is the occupant training. Like I said before, going back to that word, that the occupant was the big word that has been added to this training. If you are in the man basket, it is just as important for you to know and have the proper training that the operator does. So the first thing that they are covering in the occupant training is the requirement to use fall protection and how to use that fall protection. This is number one, because usually that occupant in the basket is most likely going to be the worker that is performing the task that they are getting to that height to complete. So it's important for them to know the fall protection requirement. Second, the factors including how their actions could affect stability. Let's say if he leans out of that basket to reach something, how is that going to affect the stability down below? Is that going to put them out of balance, and is that going to tip over that mobile elevated work platform? The safe use of mobile elevated work platforms accessories they are assigned to use. I know maybe some of you have seen the new product by Tudis, which is a wrap for the basket that is made to prevent tools from falling out. But the ability to make sure you know how that works is just as important as the safety that it brings to the table. Site-specific work procedures. Like I said, working inside is a lot different than working outside. And understanding the procedures being contained by a building with also the procedures of being exposed to the environment with weather. Hazards related to the task. Every task has different hazards, and making sure you know what you are going to be exposed for as an occupant. The general knowledge of the intended purpose and function of the mobile elevated work platform controls. Let's say for some reason that operator becomes enabled to operate that piece of equipment. I mean, that occupant's going to need to know how do we shut this piece of equipment down? How can I be lowered? He or she needs to know how to react to that situation. And then the manufacturer's warnings and instructions. Again, I know everyone doesn't read the instruction manual by the manufacturer, but it is important to know, how does this piece of equipment differ from the other? The last form of training that will be required, and it's very similar to cranes, the crane industry. In training for the personnel that will be performing the maintenance and the repair of the specific mobile elevated work platform. So in the case where a mobile elevated work platform is being rented, arrangements must be made by the owner to identify the entity that will be responsible for the inspections and maintenance activities described in this clause. So if you are renting let's say a scissor lift, it is your responsibility to identify the entity that will be performing this maintenance. I mean, maintenance could be the difference between a hydraulic succeeding and a hydraulic failing. And that's important to be able to identify who will be able to conduct that maintenance and repair. Now, those four topics of training that I mentioned, we are currently actually in the process of developing that training specific to the new standard, and that will be accessible on the toolbox if you have access to the toolbox. If not, feel free, or we'll be happy to speak with you on what that training is going to consist of more and when that's going to go into play. But other than that, I wanted to keep this short and sweet because this standard can get pretty extensive, but those are the main takeaways for this new standard change. I know it's probably the biggest change in the aerial reach industry in 40 years. So for example, they have not made changes to this since the early 70s. So it's a pretty big deal, and to be able to be open and aware of what's happening with this is ultimately going to be able to keep your company safe. So I know it looks like we have a couple questions, and we'll answer those now. And if there's any questions that we do not get to, I will follow up with you one-on-one to answer those questions. I'll also send out an email with my contact information. If any of you don't have that, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email on anything, and I'd be happy to share what we know.
Okay, Cameron, I picked out some of the most common questions that came up. The first one is, when will the standards go into effect?
So, great question. Once the final standards are approved, all aerial equipment brands and manufacturers serving North American customers will have 1 year to comply. So there's a 1 year buffer on that. We expect the standards to be finalized late 2018. So there hasn't been an exact date yet. And this has been something that's been discussed in the industry for the past 3 to 4 years, but we are looking for this to go into effect late 2018. So manufacturers will be able to use 2019 as that buffering window to comply.
Okay, and will aerial equipment manufactured prior to the changes need to be updated to comply with the new standards?
You know, I'm glad that question was asked, because my apologies for not covering that in the presentation, but that is the most popular question. That's the first question I asked when I learned about this. So neither the updated ANSI A92 or the Canadian standards will require retroactive changes, so existing fleets are not affected. So let's say you have 10 pieces of aerial work platforms or 10 pieces of equipment. That, in essence, will be grandfathered in. But anything newly purchased, newly manufactured from, let's say, JLG, Genie, or even rented from like Sunbelt or United will require to be updated according to the new standards.
Okay, and the last one here. What happens if the platform becomes overloaded with the new load sense technology?
Good question. With the new platform load sensor or load sense cell, an audible and visual alarm will alert the operator that the platform has been loaded above the machine's load capacity. It is important to educate your employees, this is very important, and the customers about what this alarm means and train them on the safe operating procedures necessary to resolve the situation. So for example, it could sound just like a backup alarm. You don't want them to think it's a backup alarm. You want them to know the piece of equipment is being overloaded.
Okay, we're up against our time. That's all we'll go over. I just want to thank everybody for attending today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us and learn about these new standards. Like Cameron said, if he wasn't able to get to your questions, he'll make sure to follow up with you and address them. Also, like I said, there'll be a follow-up email that goes out with this recording of this webinar. So in case you wanted to share it or review it again, it'll be made available to you. So thank you again for attending. And like always, please keep an eye out for future webinars put on by Allied Insurance Brokers. Have a good day.